Have you ever looked at someone and seen only their uniform? The janitor's overalls, the cashier's vest, the security guard's simple blazer. We see the role, not the soul. We see the function, not the fire that burns within. But what if the most extraordinary person you'll ever meet is the one you've trained yourself not to see at all? What if true strength isn't found in the armor someone wears, but in the quiet battles they've already won inside? This is the story of a woman everyone looked through, until she walked into a fire that had burned everyone else to ash. Her name was Alara, and she was a cleaner. To the titans of Sterling Security, she was less than a ghost. She was just a pair of hands that emptied their trash cans and wiped away the smudges their expensive shoes left on the polished marble floors. The building itself was a monument to power, a skyscraper of smoked glass and cold steel that stabbed at the sky, a place where men with shoulders as wide as doorways and voices like gravel trained to be unbreakable. They were the elite, the titans as they called themselves, handpicked by the firm's legendary head of training, Marcus Thorne. They moved through the halls with a swagger that consumed all the oxygen, their laughter echoing like small explosions, their conversations a litany of physical accomplishments and tactical jargon. Alara, by contrast, moved in the spaces they left behind. She was small and unassuming, her uniform a faded gray that seemed to help her blend into the concrete walls. She kept her head down, her movements economical and silent. While they practiced breaking down doors, she practiced making sure those doors closed without a sound. While they shouted commands, she listened to the hum of the building, the subtle language of its machinery. Her work was her meditation, a way to impose a quiet order on a small corner of a loud, chaotic world. She didn't resent the titans for their arrogance or their blindness to her existence. They were simply part of the environment she was paid to maintain, like a persistent type of dust. But in her silence, she observed. She saw the tension in their jaws before a big evaluation, the flicker of fear in their eyes they tried so hard to hide. She saw that their strength was a performance, a heavy suit of armor they never took off. Her strength was different. It was a quiet, deep well inside her, hidden from everyone, a place she went when the world became too loud. And at Sterling Security, the world was about to get very, very loud. The man at the top of the glass tower, CEO Julian Sterling, was a man drowning in frustration. He wasn't a warrior like the men Thorne hired, he was a visionary, an architect of ideas. He had built Sterling Security on a single principle, that the future of security wasn't about bigger muscles, but about sharper minds and more resilient spirits. Yet, the candidates Thorne brought him were all cut from the same cloth, ex-military, physically imposing, and utterly predictable. They excelled at every physical test, every marksmanship drill, every combat simulation. But they all failed the final test. They all broke in the Chaos Gauntlet. The Gauntlet was Sterling's masterpiece, a state-of-the-art simulation chamber designed to test a person's breaking point. It wasn't about fighting, it was about surviving sensory Armageddon. Inside, candidates were bombarded with everything at once, strobing, disorienting lights, deafening and contradictory audio commands, blasts of compressed air that mimicked explosions, and shifting floors that destroyed one's sense of balance. The goal was simple: navigate the maze, ignore the phantoms of chaos, and solve a complex logic puzzle at its heart. It was a test of the mind's ability to find a single point of calm in an ocean of panic. And every single one of Thorne's hand-picked titans had failed. Sterling watched on the observation monitor as the latest candidate, a mountain of a man named Jax, succumbed. Jax, who could bench press for 100 pounds, was curled in a fetal position on the floor, hands over his ears, screaming. Thorne stood beside Sterling, his face a mask of granite disappointment. "He has the best field record I've ever seen," Thorne grumbled, his voice low and defensive. "The simulation is flawed. It's not realistic." Sterling turned his gaze from the screen to his head of training. "Realistic? Marcus, our clients aren't facing predictable threats. They're facing asymmetrical chaos. Bombs in crowded markets, coordinated digital and physical attacks. Panic is the weapon, and our people are proving to be hopelessly vulnerable to it. We are training excellent soldiers, but I need to build unshakable guardians. Your men are strong but they're brittle. They shatter under the right kind of pressure. Thorn's jaw tightened. These are the best trained men in the country. What do you want? A Zen master? A monk? Sterling didn't answer. He just stared at the screen where Jax was being helped out of the chamber by medics, his formidable body trembling uncontrollably. Sterling wasn't looking for a soldier. He was looking for something else, someone else. He just didn't know what or who they looked like. He was searching for a person who had already been through the fire and knew, instinctively, how to find the quiet center of the storm. It was well after midnight when the incident happened. The Titans were long gone, the executive floors were dark, and the only sound in the vast building was the gentle hum of the ventilation system, and the soft squeak of Alara's cleaning cart. She was on the 44th floor, the training level, wiping down the thick glass of the Chaos Gauntlet's observation deck. It was her last task of the night. She enjoyed the quiet of the empty facility, the way the moonlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows that she would methodically erase with her mop. Suddenly, a jolt ran through the floor. A bank of emergency lights flickered on, bathing the corridor in a sickly red glow. An alarm, muffled and distorted, began to blare from inside the gauntlet itself. Down the hall, in the control room, a junior technician had been running a late-night diagnostic and had accidentally triggered a low-level initiation sequence. Marcus Thorne, who had been working late in his office, came running, his face a thundercloud of fury. "Shut it down. Shut it all down now," he roared at the terrified technician. But the system was locked in its initiation cycle. It would take a few minutes to override. During that time, the gauntlet's internal mechanisms whirred to life. The strobing lights began their chaotic dance, muted by the soundproofed walls but still visible as frantic flashes from within. The floor plates started to shift with audible groans. Alara, who had been standing directly in front of the entrance when the sequence began, found herself caught in the middle of the unfolding technical failure. The inner security door hadn't sealed, but the corridor outside was now a minor pandemonium of flashing red lights and blaring local alarms. Her cart, jostled by the vibration, tipped over, spilling bottles and rags across the floor. Thorne and the technician were too busy wrestling with the control console to even notice her. But Julian Sterling, monitoring the building's security feeds from his penthouse office, saw everything. He zoomed in on the feed for the 44th floor corridor. He saw Thorne yelling. He saw the flashing lights. And he saw the cleaner. He expected her to panic, to run, to scream. But she did none of those things. Alara simply blinked at the chaos erupting around her. She looked at the flashing lights with a dispassionate curiosity, as if they were merely a swarm of harmless fireflies. Then, with a sigh of weary patience, she knelt. She didn't run from the noise. She didn't cower from the lights. With a slow, deliberate grace, she began to pick up her spilled supplies, carefully placing each bottle back into her cart, her movements as calm and unhurried as if she were tidying a quiet library. In a corridor filled with technological panic, she was an island of absolute serenity. Sterling leaned closer to his screen, his frustration forgotten, replaced by a sudden, intense fascination. Who was this woman? The next morning, Sterling called Marcus Thorne into his office. The view from the CEO's suite was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of the city, but Thorne kept his eyes fixed on Sterling. He expected a reprimand for the previous night's system failure. He was not prepared for what came next. "I want you to put the cleaner in the gauntlet," Sterling said, his voice calm and level. Thorne stared, certain he had misheard. "Sir." "The cleaner," Sterling repeated, turning from the window to face him directly. "The woman who was on the floor last night during the malfunction. Her name is Alara. I want her to run the full simulation." A beat of silence passed, and then Thorne let out a short, incredulous bark of laughter. He quickly stifled it when he saw the utter seriousness in Sterling's expression. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, that is the most absurd thing I have ever heard. She's a cleaner. She has zero training. No combat experience. No physical conditioning. The men who failed that test are some of the toughest operators on the planet. Putting her in there wouldn't be a test, it would be an act of cruelty. She could be psychologically traumatized. Sterling walked over to his desk and tapped a screen, bringing up the security footage from the night before. He played the clip of Ilara calmly picking up her supplies amidst the flashing lights and alarms. "Look at that, Marcus. You and your technician were in a state of panic. The system was in chaos. And she is in a state of perfect calm. That is what I've been looking for. Not muscle. Not training. Resilience. The innate ability to remain centered when the world is falling apart." Thorne's face hardened, his professional pride deeply wounded. "That's not resilience, sir. That's ignorance. She probably didn't even understand the danger. She's a simple person. You can't mistake a lack of intellect for mental fortitude. My men failed because they understood the tactical implications of that level of sensory overload. She just saw some flashing lights." The condescension in his voice was thick. He saw this not just as a foolish idea, but as a direct insult to his expertise, and the caliber of the men he had dedicated his life to training. "I am ordering you to do it, Marcus," Sterling said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Consider it an experiment. A baseline. We need a new perspective, and we are going to get 1 inch." Thorne felt a surge of defiant anger. He would do it, but he would make sure it ended exactly as he predicted. "Fine," he clipped out, his jaw rigid. "I'll schedule it. But I want it on record that I advised against this. And I want my men to witness it. They need to see what a waste of time this new perspective is." Sterling nodded slowly. "Good. Let them watch. It's time they learned a new lesson." News of the cleaner's test spread through the facility like a virus. It started as a hushed rumor before blooming into open mockery. The Titans, their egos still bruised from their own failures in the gauntlet, seized upon it as a perfect outlet for their frustration. Ilara became the butt of every joke. They would see her in the halls and make loud, sarcastic comments. "Hey, better wipe down the floor in the gauntlet before you go in, wouldn't want to slip," one of them called out, followed by a chorus of harsh laughter. "Maybe she'll try to scrub the simulation to death," another sneered. They saw her as an absurdity, a walking punchline sent by the CEO to trivialize their own very real struggles. Ilara heard it all. She felt their eyes on her as she pushed her cart, the weight of their scorn like a physical pressure on her shoulders. But her expression remained a placid, unreadable mask. She did not react, she did not retort, she did not even quicken her pace. She simply continued her work, her movements as measured and deliberate as ever. On the outside, she was a statue. But inside, the noise of their ridicule was nothing compared to the echoes of her past. Their laughter couldn't touch the memories that had shaped her. She remembered the day her world had collapsed. Not figuratively, but literally. She had been a young woman, a librarian in a city far away, when the earthquake struck. The building, a grand old structure of stone and marble, had groaned and then shattered around her. She remembered the terrifying roar, the darkness, the feeling of being buried alive. In the rubble, surrounded by the cries of the injured and the terrifying silence of the dead, she had learned the most profound lesson of her life. Panic was a predator. It was a thief that stole your breath, your reason, your hope. In those long, dust-choked hours under the weight of a fallen city, she had discovered a different path. Stillness. She had controlled her breathing, conserved her energy, and listened. She listened for the faintest sounds, the shifting of debris, the distant shouts of rescuers. She had turned inward, finding a core of absolute calm within the tomb of concrete. It was that calm that had kept her alive until they finally pulled her from the wreckage. Now the Chaos Gauntlet did not seem like a threat to her. It was just a room with loud noises and bright lights. It was a pale, synthetic imitation of a horror she had already survived. Their test was her memory. Her motivation for agreeing to Sterling's strange request wasn't to prove the Titans wrong or to become a hero. It was a quiet, personal pilgrimage. She needed to walk back into a storm and see if that unshakable calm was still there, to prove to herself that she was still in control of the one thing she truly owned, her own spirit. The day before the test, Thorne summoned Alara to his office. The room was aggressively masculine, decorated with military plaques and photos of Thorne in uniform. He had her stand in the center of the room, while he sat behind his large, imposing desk, a predator observing his prey. "I'm required to give you a briefing," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. He didn't look at her, instead focusing on a file on his desk. He then began a rapid-fire monologue, a torrent of tactical acronyms, threat assessment protocols, and system interface jargon. It was a deliberate performance, designed to overwhelm and confuse, to reinforce her status as an outsider. The primary objective is to reach the central console and override the lockdown sequence. You'll face multiple simulated threats, both auditory and kinetic. Threat response protocols 7 Alpha and 9 Charlie will be in effect. Pay attention to the audio cues for IED signatures, but disregard any non-essential comms chatter, which will be broadcast to disorient you. Understood. He finally looked up, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, expecting to see a face full of confusion and fear. Alara simply met his gaze and gave a single, slight nod. She hadn't understood the jargon, but she had understood the intent. He was telling her that the room would be full of lies, and that she needed to find the one simple truth at its center. Her silence seemed to infuriate him more than any argument could have. He tossed a bundle of black fabric onto the desk. "Your gear. Be suited up and at the gauntlet entrance at 0800 tomorrow." It was a standard tactical uniform. When Alara took it to the locker room, she found it was sized for a man twice her weight. As she walked to the entrance the next morning, the uniform hung off her small frame in awkward folds. The sleeves were too long, the pants baggy. She looked less like a security operator and more like a child playing dress-up. The Titans who had gathered to watch the spectacle didn't bother to hide their snickers. They pointed and whispered, their amusement echoing in the cavernous training bay. Alara ignored them. She walked with her head held high, her spine straight. The ill-fitting suit was just another layer of noise, another distraction to be tuned out. It was their armor, not hers. Her armor was invisible. She didn't need their gear or their approval. All she needed was her breath, and the quiet, unbreakable silence she carried inside her. The observation deck was crowded. Every recruit Thorne could spare was there, lining the tiered seating, their arms crossed, faces set in smug anticipation. They looked like spectators at a Roman circus, waiting for the lion to be released. Mr. Sterling stood at the front, his expression neutral, giving nothing away. Marcus Thorne was at the control console, a master of ceremonies about to begin a public execution. He made a show of powering up the system, his movements exaggerated for the audience. Alara stood before the massive, circular steel door of the Chaos Gauntlet. In the baggy uniform, she looked impossibly small, a fragile doll about to be fed to a machine. Thorne's voice boomed over the intercom, not for her benefit but for the recruits watching. "Candidate is ready. Commencing simulation run. Protocol, Chaos Gauntlet. Intensity level. Maximum." He pressed a final button with a dramatic flourish. A low murmur went through the crowd of recruits. They had all faced the gauntlet, but none of them at its highest setting. Thorne was not just testing her, he was making a statement. This was not an experiment, it was a punishment for Sterling's audacity. A deep, mechanical groan echoed through the bay as the heavy door began to slide shut. For a moment, Alara was framed in the shrinking gap, a lone figure against the darkness within. Then the door sealed with a heavy, final thud, locking her in. The world outside vanished. For a few seconds there was only absolute blackness and a profound, ringing silence. Then, the universe exploded. The floor beneath her feet bucked violently. A wall of sound hit her like a physical blow, a cacophony of simulated gunfire, screeching metal, human screams, and overlapping, contradictory commands shouted from hidden speakers. "Evacuate. Get down. Move to the north wall. Ignore all previous orders. Simultaneously, the darkness was shattered by a blinding, psychotic strobe effect, lights flashing in unpredictable, nauseating patterns, designed to overload the optic nerve and induce extreme vertigo. Blasts of cold, compressed air shot from vents in the walls, simulating the concussive force of nearby explosions. On the main screen in the observation room, Ilara's small silhouette was barely visible amidst the visual chaos. The recruits leaned forward. This was the moment they all recognized, the sensory overload that had broken each and every one of them. They expected her to scream. They expected her to fall. They waited for the inevitable collapse. But Ilara did not scream. She did not fall. In the heart of the synthetic hurricane, as the floor pitched and the air cracked with sound, she did something no one expected. She stood perfectly still. On the monitor, they saw her silhouette straighten. She took one long, slow breath in, and then let it out just as slowly. She closed her eyes. It was a gesture of such profound and defiant calm, that it seemed to suck all the energy out of the chaos around her. The recruits exchanged confused glances. Thorne stared at the screen, his brow furrowed. What was she doing? She wasn't reacting. She wasn't even trying to move. Then, she opened her eyes. And she began to move. It wasn't the frantic, desperate scramble the Titans had attempted. It wasn't a charge or a retreat. It was a dance. She moved with a liquid grace, an economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. The shifting floor, which had sent burly men tumbling, became a partner in her movement. She didn't fight its motion, she rode it, adjusting her balance with subtle shifts of her weight, like a surfer on a wave. The strobing lights, meant to disorient, seemed to have no effect. She wasn't looking at them. Her gaze was fixed inward, her path guided by an internal compass that was impervious to the storm outside. She flowed through the obstacles, her hands brushing against walls to orient herself, her feet finding purchase on the unstable ground. The contradictory audio commands washed over her, meaningless noise. She had already understood Thorne's briefing, it was all a lie. The only truth was the path forward. She was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the whirlwind. On the observation deck, the snickering had long since died, replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. The recruits were watching a performance that defied their entire understanding of strength and survival. They had tried to conquer the gauntlet with force, to grit their teeth, and power through it. Ilara was doing the opposite. She was yielding to it, becoming part of it, and in doing so, she was mastering it completely. She wasn't fighting the chaos. She was simply refusing to acknowledge its power over her. Marcus Thorne's face had become a pale, tight mask of disbelief. He tapped furiously at his console, running diagnostics, convinced the simulation had malfunctioned, that it must be running at a lower intensity. The readings came back green across the board. System nominal. Intensity, 100%. He looked from his console to the screen and back again, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. This was impossible. This quiet, unassuming cleaner was navigating his ultimate test with a composure his most elite soldiers couldn't muster for a fraction of a second. He felt a cold dread creeping into his gut. It was the feeling of his entire worldview, his entire professional identity, beginning to crack. Julian Sterling, however, watched with an expression of pure, unadulterated vindication. He wasn't just watching an employee pass a test. He was witnessing the living embodiment of his philosophy. He saw now that he had been looking for strength in all the wrong places, in resumes, in service records, in physical size. But true, unbreakable strength wasn't something you could train in a gym, or on a firing range. It was forged in the crucibles of life, in the silent, unseen battles of the human heart. Ilara reached the center of the gauntlet. Before her was the final objective, a complex panel designed to simulate defusing an explosive device. A screen flashed with a dizzying array of schematics and a scrolling list of contradictory instructions, the final piece of psychological warfare. Cut the red wire. Do not cut the red wire. Sequence Gamma is required. Sequence Gamma is a decoy. The Titans had all frozen here, their adrenaline-flooded minds incapable of processing the logic puzzle. Elara didn't even try to read the screen. She knew it was just more noise. Instead, she did something extraordinary. She placed her palm flat against the surface of the console, closing her eyes again. She wasn't looking, she was feeling. Feeling for the subtle vibrations, the faint heat signature from the active, correct circuits beneath the panel. She was listening to the machine, not with her ears, but with her entire being. After a moment, her hand moved with unerring certainty. 3 precise taps on 3 specific locations on the panel. A loud, satisfying chime echoed through the gauntlet. All at once the simulation died. The strobing lights went dark, the deafening noise cut to absolute silence, and the floor settled into stillness. On the giant monitor in the observation room, the mission timer froze, displaying a new record time that shattered the previous best by more than half. The only sound in the room was the collective, sharp intake of breath from 24 stunned recruits. The great steel door hissed open, flooding the dark chamber with the bright, sterile light of the training bay. Elara stepped out. She wasn't panting for breath. She wasn't trembling. There was no look of triumph on her face, no sign of the ordeal she had just endured. She looked exactly as she always did, calm, composed, present. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the light, and then she looked at the sea of faces staring back at her in stunned silence. The recruits, the Titans, looked at her with a new kind of awe, their mockery replaced by a profound and unsettling respect. They weren't looking at a cleaner anymore. They were looking at someone who had walked through a hell of their own making and emerged completely untouched. Before Thorn could even gather his thoughts, Julian Sterling strode past him, meeting Elara at the edge of the gauntlet platform. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a handshake. He simply looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, sincere gratitude. "Thank you, Elara," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. "You have shown all of us what real strength looks like." He then turned to face Thorn and the assembled recruits. "For months, we have been trying to build an unbreakable operator. We have focused on physical conditioning, tactical skills, and aggression. We have failed every time. Today, Elara has shown us why. We were trying to build a better suit of armor, when we should have been forging a stronger spirit." Thorn finally found his voice, sputtering, "Sir, this is an anomaly. A fluke. She can't possibly." Sterling raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "The only anomaly here, Marcus, is our own blindness. We have been searching for warriors to fight the enemy in front of them. But the most dangerous enemy is the one within, the panic, the fear, the chaos in our own minds. Elara has already conquered that enemy." He turned back to Elara. "I am creating a new position at this company, effective immediately. Head of Psychological Resilience Training. I want you to design our new training doctrine. I want you to teach our people how to find the calm you possess." Elara looked at the powerful CEO, then at the humbled faces of the recruits, and finally at the shattered arrogance of Marcus Thorn. For the first time, a small, knowing smile touched her lips. She gave a simple nod. "I will." The final scene is months later. The training bay is different. The aggressive obstacle courses have been replaced with spaces for meditation and focus exercises. A new group of recruits, diverse in age, gender, and background, sit not in rigid rows but in a circle. At its center stands Elara, now wearing a simple, gray instructor's uniform that fits her perfectly. Marcus Thorn is gone. The era of the Titan is over. Elara looks at the fresh, attentive faces before her. "The first lesson," she says, her voice not loud but clear and resonant, filling the entire space, "is that true strength is not about how you fight the storm. It is about how you become the calm at its center. So, the next time you walk past someone you think is invisible, the person cleaning the floors or serving your coffee, maybe take a second look. You might be looking at a hero who has already fought and won the most important battles. The greatest strength is rarely the loudest. It's the quiet, resilient core that has learned to weather any storm. Share this story if you believe in the hidden power within everyone. Comment below with a time you underestimated someone, or were underestimated yourself. And remind someone today that their quiet strength is seen, and it is more powerful than they can possibly imagine.